Let's start with a couple of questions which are a bit specific, but it will get a discussion going. Let's, first thing, Sisir, I worry about having technological interventions with real no consequences. It's only a matter of time till that learning percolates in the system. They know that someone's calling, but no one's really watching this data. So do we see any time trend of a decline? In fact, we do see when someone raises a question of why do you see the decline? Could this be the reason?
It could be. I mean, we all try to find out loopholes, and whenever a system is made, the loopholes are unknown. Then they are discovered later, and people figure out there are no consequences of misreporting. So you have to tie it down to monitoring, that is physical monitoring, and later on 2014 onward, the government has actually done that. So I did not talk about this, but in 2015 or 16, I don't recall exactly, the state government has actually made the inspection process completely digital, in the sense they have put the inspection form inside a tablet, and now the inspectors have to take the tablet to each and every school, and the form automatically notes the latitude and longitude of the place, because earlier they would just sit in their office and fill up those inspection reports. And they also have to take a picture of the school that they inspected, which gets stamped by the date of inspection as well. So one can think of increasing the frequency of such inspections to make sure that this data is used properly.
Excellent. The second is in terms of, you notice a fall in the test score, and there is a private versus public difference there. Do you know anything about the pass-out rate stagnating around the year when the midday meal starts? Because anecdotal evidence suggests that kids are just not graduating to the next class because this benefit stops. Are we seeing any of those evidences in the Bihar data?
So for that, we would need longitudinal data on kids to see when exactly they're dropping out, right? And unfortunately, we just don't have the data on whether that is improving or not. So it's difficult. It's an important question, but due to data limitations, it's difficult to answer that question.
So you don't have the data yet?
No, we don't have the data.
The other is about, the principle. It was very interesting to see the call completion rate. I'm assuming this is a proxy for diligence. I mean, these are principals who are, who are conscious, and they probably do the diligence that is required of the principal, and therefore, those are better schools.
So that's correct. So if schools are completing calls or their rates of completion of calls are very, very high, that immediately implies that headmaster goes by the rule book, at least answers the call. So it is not far-fetched to assume that they are also doing other tasks competitively or efficiently as well, and they are also providing meals, and that's what we pick up when we run those regression analyses. So that's why I said this is not causal in nature, this is simple correlation. So what we are trying to do now, since this is a very, very large data set, we are trying to slice these headmasters or schools into completely two different categories based on whether they, not based on call completion rates or some other metric which tells us that there was something correct or wrong. So we from
male, female, for instance?
No, not male, female, exactly. So sometimes we see some, we see the raw data and we see weird numbers being punched in. Sometimes beneficiary number is higher than the enrollment number. That happens frequently. So we could use this data and machine learning to actually use something called clustering, key means clustering, which is technical, but ideally what it is doing essentially, it's dividing. For example, you can collect some data from a particular patient, and there are AI algorithms that can tell you whether the patient is susceptible to cardiovascular disease or not. We're trying to do the same thing with this data set. So from this data set, we could see whether the headmaster is more likely to complete the calls versus less likely to complete the calls. Essentially, this is an heterogeneity analysis.
Right.
And that way, we want to draw conclusions about causality between call completion rate and
but something even stronger, no? I mean, imagine if you were able to establish that kind of, or you were able to pick out certain traits. It could go into recruitment decisions, it could go into multiple other governance reforms that are required within the school system in India, because we have we are yet to, we look at interventions such as this, but the elephant in the room often is the teachers' union. We know that, they don't want to work because there is no obvious incentive. Those are the amenities, and we don't know what the reality is. But if you do get that heterogeneity, is to say that, teachers with a certain qualification, a certain background, a certain training are likely to perform better, that would be of tremendous value, I think.
Yeah, so we would love to do it. It's just that teacher level data is not available.
Now, the one small question, and this might be really just my question, and to the rest of the audience it might be very clear. I wasn't very clear on the rice lifted versus rice consumed. I would imagine that you inflate the numbers because you get more cash, or if you get rice, then you sell that rice to then consume the cash. So it's a bit puzzling why the two numbers are actually the same.
Okay, so there are two reasons why you may want to, say that you are providing midday meals when you are actually not. The reason is A, just plain shirking. So I just don't want to be harassed by my district boss telling me why you are not providing meals. I would much rather write 100% there, be happy, go home. So it's not always siphoning of resources, it could be shirking as well, and whatever we see comes towards more shirking and then less siphoning of resources.
Now, one last question before we open it to the audience. This is more like Debnath versus Pritchett. If Pritchett believes that we can actually quite strongly see that certain schemes have failed, there is merit to shutting them down. But an analysis like this really tells us that for programs that are not working, marginal gains can be made through interventions such as this. How should we really see this? Perhaps midday meal is a good idea for other states but not in Bihar. Maybe we should really think of some other ways of meeting those objectives. So let's just shut it. I mean, this has been very provocative, but that's the idea of a seminar like this, that we need to go back to the larger general equilibrium question of are marginal gains out of interventions such as this sufficient to keep certain large schemes from shutting down?
That's true. This is again, I haven't really thought about this question in detail, but thanks for asking this. It will prompt me to think. But off the top of my head, what I think is that, the heart of this is essentially principal agent problem. Economists have spent so much time and effort to think about this. And the one solution that they came up with is design incentives properly. That doesn't work in public setting. You cannot change salary structure. People will be up in arms against governments, especially teachers. There's such a strong lobby. Another way to do it is to make information, or rather monitoring in a sense, right? The problem with monitoring that was there earlier, it was very, very expensive. And two things has happened since Pritchett wrote this and we did the study is basically there's been data revolution in India, right? So if not 3G data, 2G data I would say is almost surely will get anywhere you go. Because there'll be, if nothing else, a BSNL tower would be there. So what that means is that if you are collecting a very small amount of data, it shouldn't be that expensive. So data is available. Mobile telephony penetration rates, the way it has been adopted in India is just phenomenal. I mean, any technology adoption in the history of the world hasn't seen this much of adoption rate, right? So if this kind of monitoring can be done, or can, this information gathering exercises can be done in a very cheap way, why not give it a shot?
Great. So now we'll open it to the audience. Identify yourself and limit it to one question, please. Can we get the mics around?
My name is Anjali. I work in Learning Links. We do education programs in government schools. I just make two comments and maybe one question. I really appreciate what I heard of your presentation, though I came in a little late and I will study it further. Children do come hungry to school all over India even today, so midday meal, whatever we can do to make it better is important. I don't see how impactful just, a headmaster putting in data is, but what your research shows, it is impactful because they do put in incorrect data very often. For monitoring, it's just a suggestion here, I don't know who would take that up. Using children themselves and community works. We've tried it in 200 schools. The children take a photograph of the food they are getting and just count how many were in school. And that has changed what happens there. Or a mother of a child would come in, take the photo and upload it. So I think it's an extremely important topic. I've learned something coming here today and hope to see much more happening to make sure that that meal keeps going out and children really need it. Thank you.
So let's collect a couple of questions and then perhaps you can respond. Can we get the microphones? Oh, and to the doctor. Yeah,
Okay. Hi, my name is Dhruv. I'm Dr. Shamika Ravi's research assistant. So I have a question on, do you have data on where telephone towers are and how far they are from these schools? And could you use that as an instrumental variable to understand whether call quality affects attendance?
So let me respond first to your question. Okay. I'm Deepak here. So
there's a web portal called Sanchar Tarang, which actually has data in the public domain of all the operators in the country, including 2G, 3G, 4G, everything. So that data, and it's available for towers as well as for respective operators. So that data is available. I'm not so sure about the schools, but that on the telecom side is available. So my question was something related to what Anjali mentioned. Of course, she mentioned about uploading of the photographs and other things, which at times might be a challenge in terms of, like you mentioned about 2G capacity and other things. But are there other processes or things that you have explored for crowdsourcing this type of information so that you can corroborate what one particular person in authority is saying vis-a-vis the beneficiaries and their extended families? That's one. Second thing is in terms of the learning outcomes. I've heard anecdotally again that in many places what happens that most of the children are in the school only up to the time of midday meal service, and after that many of them as well as many of the teachers go away. Now this has two different aspects. One, post the midday meal service, the teachers are actually more free to teach, because before that many of them are busy cooking. Okay, so when the teachers are busy, there are more number of students in the school, and when the teachers have more time to teach, there are less number of students in the school.
Do you want to take those three before we go to
Yeah,
the next one?
otherwise I have a short memory. So, Anjali, I do understand your concerns that your comment was about rather than having headmasters report them, one can engage more community and photographs taken by the students as well. So that that has been tried, not in the context of midday meal, but when I was presenting the literature there, there is a very famous paper by an econometrician or economist from MIT. His name is Ben Olkin, and did exactly what you were suggesting, whether monitoring by community is more important than top-down monitoring by the government. And it actually, what he finds is what matters is the fear of being inspected and found that you have been doing something wrong, right? So one thing that potentially, I do agree that community monitoring is required, but sometimes the literacy levels are also very low. One can think of linking the phone numbers of the parents to schools, or there are committees called Mahila Samakhya committees and all that. So one can think of linking the phone numbers of these members of school committee to a particular school and seeking the same information from the headmaster and the other people who have stake in that school, and let's see how widely these two responses differ. That could be one way to make sure that it is not only headmaster who is submitting the data, but it is also being corroborated by other community members as well. So, but again, somebody may be not happy with the headmaster, may submit some other report. So, I mean, the government has to think about it. How do you technically ensure community participation in verifying the responses by the headmaster? So there could be several things that could be discussed. The idea about using mobile networks as an instrumental variable is a good one. However, the choice of mobile towers is endogenous. They put towers only when they think there will be a profitable number of customers who will be subscribers. And if these areas are also more developed, and if these areas are also areas where people are literate, and they demand and schools are also better, then it defeats the purpose. So that could be one reason why it might not be used. Thank you so much for telling us that this mobile tower data exists. And of course, your question was about
The teachers and the students.
yeah. So it's unfortunate that when teachers have time, kids are not there to learn, and when the kids are there, the teachers are busy cooking. So we have
Is that true though?
Yeah.
Deepak?
I don't know, I've heard about it. I'm
Acha.
just saying.
So for-
So isn't there a fixed time, for instance, for this meal? Is it in the middle of the
so,
day?
So the timing for the meal is fixed. But what happens is in most of the schools, it's the teachers who have to cook. Some of the teachers. So either by rotation or in some manner. So they have to spend that time. So that means during that time, we have less number of teachers who are available actually for teaching. And if the students flee away or are taken away or are sent out,
So-
then they are not available after that.
It's a valid question, but after recently, a lot of money and effort has been allocated to make sure that there is a separate cooking staff and there is a separate kitchen shade in the school. But how much of that has been actually utilized? How many schools have been able to recruit, cooks? Those are unknown numbers because we simply do not have individual school level data on these numbers. So that's the one reason I could not give an answer.
Okay, maybe we'll go to the next set of questions. We'll start with you, Ma'am.
I'm Karuna Chanda. I was with the Center for Educational Studies, JNU. I was wondering, is there any possibility of looking at the impact of the midday meal scheme and the headmasters being directly in charge of it, its impact on governance? Because that will, or you have said at some point in time, that maybe they are too busy with midday meals to look at other. So that will be one, I think, aspect that it will be good to look at. And to outsource midday meals to NGOs, like I think Delhi has done with Akshay Patra. Now, I'd like you to interpret this last line for me. Enrollment in school declines, which means inflation reduces. Inflated figures are not there. But then attendance increases. How do you interpret it?
Maybe one of the
Yeah. Hi, I'm Dipanshu. I teach courses in development economics at Jindal University. So having worked in Bihar for a while, I was fascinated to come and so it was very interesting observations because they give a state level perspective. A quick point on the crowding out effect that you've highlighted on student learning outcomes as against with compliance with midday meal programs. In fact, that was observationally seen to be true across most villages. You'll find that one of the things that of course data doesn't capture is there are social variables that are very highly significant in most cases in Bihar. You get district level data, but once you go across from village to village and start looking at schools, the huge variations across the board. So those intra-district variations are huge. But the three significant aspects that we found that were responsible for this crowding out effect of learning outcomes as against with compliance with MT. One was an increased compliance with right to education. As more and more schools started complying, the grade promotion levels got compromised for. So students had to be passed from one grade to the other, so their learning outcomes were pretty poor. The second was the nature of teaching contracts. Teachers are hired, but they're mostly in subcontracting terms, as you pointed out once. And that made a huge difference on learning outcomes. They're coming in one person is taking classes for 3, so there's one science teacher and he's taking classes for almost 5 subjects, and that was making a huge difference. The third, which is on the number of hours for lectures as against for meals, which was pointed out earlier, that's a huge factor that was responsible. So these were like 3 variables that we found in terms of student learning outcomes that were responsible for some of the learning artifacts.
Maybe the third question.
Hi, my name is Rohan. I'm from Niti Aayog. I had a point of clarification. How big is the enrollment attendance gap? Because I didn't see a graph on that. And also I had a hypothesis about the test scores going down. But I just want to know that for arithmetic and reading, when are the classes taking place? Are they taking place before the midday meals or after the midday meals? If you have that data, could you please show me that?
Okay, so enrollment in schools is declining, but attendance increasing. So what it means is essentially from the baseline, from where it was, let's say the enrollment was 90 and attendance was, let's say, 60%. So enrollment coming down from 90 to 80, attendance improving from 60 to 70. So
they're more in correspondence.
so they are converging together, right? So that's the meaning of that sentence there. The 3 factors that you said were responsible for learning outcomes. So the first one that you mentioned was RTE, the second one was contract teachers, and the third one that you mentioned was the time that headmasters or teachers have for instruction hours, right? So I'm not mistaken, RTE was not implemented in 2012, was it?
No, that was basically as more and more schools were found to be more compliant with RTE norms, you were seeing this.
So unless something drastically changes in 2012, these results would not be captured in that. Also another thing is teacher contracts. More schools are merging towards more contract teachers. Again, if something didn't drastically change in 2012, then those would not be confounding factors either. So if any of these dimensions that you're mentioning suddenly change in 2012 and only in Bihar, then we have a confounding factor, right? So that we can check whether these were the factors. The last thing that you mentioned here was whether these test scores are being, where are they being administered, right? They are not administered.
I'm asking when so we've got test scores for arithmetic and reading, right?
Yeah, when they are administered, right?
No, I'm asking when the learning is happening. Is the learning happening for these tests? Is it happening before the midday meals or after the midday meals?
So schools have periods, right? So 1 hour periods. And in which period they will teach arithmetic, in which period they will teach English or Hindi, that varies across schools, right? So I cannot tell you, there is no fixed
Well, as
schedule.
long as they systematically didn't change the schedule after that IVRS was introduced.
It's more than if schools have classes on reading that are after the midday meal, maybe the midday meal happens at 12, right? So maybe the kids are just tired and they can't focus in the class. I'm trying to find out, is there a correlation that is the midday meal tiring these kids so that they can't learn?
That is an excellent hypothesis, but there is no way we can test it because we do not know when the kids are essentially, when each period or each subject is being taught, whether they are before or after. We just don't have that data. I mean, we don't even have longitudinal data. Having school level, period level data is, yes, we would love to have them, but we just don't.
Can I just add
It has an
one comment?
insight.
I just want to add a comment. As they rightly said, the school timetable is laid out as it is. In the schools, we've seen children who come hungry to school will not learn till they are fed. If they are fed, they can at least focus on learning. And we monitor ourselves on English and math baseline endlines because we are in education. We make sure the English math class happens immediately after the food. Children are happy, well fed, they study, and then we sort of let them go. So it's a very different scene out there. Children come hungry, whole night they've not eaten. Morning they are not focused on anything till you. We have preponed midday meal times on our own. पहले बच्चों को खाना खिला दो फिर पढ़ाएंगे.
Maybe we'll take one more round. Rohan, maybe we'll have some coffee after this and we'll chat more. Maybe 3 more questions and then we'll have to wrap up. Yes.
Hi, my name is Banu. I'm from the HRD ministry. So any of the 5 teachers can take the IVRS call, right? So given that, like, what is the incentive for her to like say the truth? Given that the principal or headmaster can go to the Dopair website and find out how it was answered.
So yeah, the same question, because what essentially you're talking about is that you're changing or delegating the responsibility of compliance from the quarterly report to a daily mechanism. So how do you incentivize truth telling?
Is there one more?
I actually had exactly the same question.
Oh, good. So, what are the odds that 3 heads have the same idea at the same time? Well, we have one other.
Thank you very much. You gave a very vivid description about the right of food and education. But my question is very simple. You have not classified the school, because if the schools are in a zone of abject poverty, they are different from the urban schools. And then in the other cities, and then you go to the rural villages, those schools are different. So I think then you will get better picture whether and then the primary health center would also tell us that how much they need for our these things. So rating schools, I didn't find anywhere. So that is more important what I feel, because that will give us the best of the pictures that in urban cities, A1 cities, we are getting this result, we are getting result villages this, and the districts which are very, loaded with, like say, Muslim or Dalit population. What are those status if they are making some benefit out of it? Thank you very much.
Okay. So the first question is on how the call is made. So I went over this slide very quickly. So if there are 5 teachers in a school, and all the 5 numbers are registered, the system picks up one of them randomly, and that happens at random, and then they ask the question. So note that none of the existing system were changed. So the other verification methods, inspection methods, they remained exactly the way it was. So nothing else changed except for the fact that the government is getting more frequent data and self-reported more frequent data. The only way it could have mattered, let's suppose there is an inspection and the headmaster essentially says to the inspector, I did not cook any food today because of this reason, and nobody was fed. And then later on, let us suppose, because there is nothing for the inspector to verify what that headmaster is going to say when the BRB is going to come at the end of the month, right? But if, let's suppose, before the inspector comes, the inspector can see what that headmaster has reported to the IVRS for that particular day. And let's say they see that the headmaster has reported 300 kids were fed. And the inspector goes and finds there's no kid in the school, there's no sign of preparing any meals. In that cases, which is very rare, if that happens, then there's a very, very high penalty involved with that particular situation. So likelihood of it being inspected is once in 365 days. And it's not even true that they are inspected every single year either. So even though there is a very, very tiny probability, there is a probability of being detected, caught, and penalized. So that is where the fight is. Okay, if whatever is fine is causing all these things. Another thing is these schools are some of them are very, very remote areas. They don't even have any interaction with anything remotely government except for getting their check. So if somebody calls them up every single day, there is a sense of monitoring that, okay, I am interacting with someone is calling me, trying to figure out what I am doing. I mean, one reason why many public healthcare and education officers, they are frustrated because there is no interaction between the management and those who are working in the field. So that interaction is bridged and they know, okay, somebody is asking some question to me, right? So that could have played a role. But again, these are all hypotheses. I cannot really test them out because I don't have the requisite amount of data on this.
The question on heterogeneity.
The question on heterogeneity, that's a good question to ask. We have not done any heterogeneity analysis as of yet. We are about to do it. And most likely what we are going to do is, heterogeneity analysis can be done in any metric that you can cut the data with, income level.
But it has very deep policy implications, and that's why it becomes important that while you clearly establish the causal link, that a well done definitive with the high frequency data that you have, but the policy implications will really get drawn out of is the problem more severe in rural versus urban, connectivity?
Now, suppose the 10% are not doing well, but in compounding the average, it will show nothing.
So as I said, this is research under progress, and heterogeneity is the last section in the paper that we write. So it's
an idea.
no, we are thinking along the same lines. We haven't done that.